We're okay. We usually start at 5:15, don't we? But people can usually come in. So, yeah, I'm fine. Just to if you start. I mean, we're on there for the camera. I'll just mention with Alan and yourself. 10 to 10 tomorrow. We said
10 to 10. Okay.
Yeah,
and you're coming to my office at 9.
That's right. Yes, to check my emails before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The room. That's great.
Yeah.
But it's great that Phil's here because this idea of community-based auditing is something that we're going to be developing in a project in Keynsham, where we're not sure at the moment how to get communities together to generate a sense of well-being from the community itself. And so this is one of the reasons we're connecting in with Phil's ideas. But it's lovely tonight that we've got Phil, and it is from Tasmania where the ideas have developed. So thanks, Phil. And if this is okay, we'll work video, and then hopefully I'll get this onto YouTube, early next week. Is that okay? That's great.
Now, time. What time do you want me to run to? Is it just open-ended till we finish, or?
It is. I mean, usually, if we have about a 40-minute chat and as much then conversation as we can, but we'll just go on until people are feeling, that's enough.
Feel free to jump in at any time, I guess, so it's a bit interactive if we need to, so I'm not lecturing from the front too much. Not that I'm that good at lecturing. Okay. Look, first of all, a really big thank you to Jack and Alan in particular for the invitation here tonight, and not just for that, but for their support and their collegial engagement for a period of quite some time now, a few years now, and I'm really, really appreciative of their support. The community-based auditing is sort of some 10 years old now as an idea, and has been sort of operating in that time as well. And I've left some 40 documents or published documents with Marie on her PC, which we've got to check the integrity of to make sure that they're all loaded for others to delve into should they wish, which gives us sort of a real-life example of what goes on in the auditing process. And this developed into a PhD in the finish. I come out of a master's full research project as a distance student in 2002, and then I had further questions about community engagement and the evolution of science itself in terms of relevance to community and in terms of access by community. So there are a number of questions I came out of which had many links to many disciplines and sub-disciplines, if you want to use the term. Natural resource management is where I found myself, but there are also links into social science, there are links into where science is going, so I took an excursion into what we call post-normal science. There were links to inclusionality. But fortunately, from meeting Jack, I was really able to sort of, in terms of writing the PhD and finding a place for this discourse, to this narrative to live, and the learning that emerged from it to live, was this great thing called living theory. Living educational theory, which is an absolute, for me, it's been an absolute godsend, because when nobody else can understand me in terms of what I wanted to do with the methodology, Jack Whitehead knew the way, and I am just so grateful for his encouragement and support, and in his mentoring as I grasped what. And I still haven't fully grasped it, but as I grasped living theory as a way of presenting my narrative. And also many thanks to Alan, because I see inclusionality as a way forward for community-based auditing, because I want to be really clear at the outset that it is not a panacea, it is not even a band-aid, it is a starting point for change, by offering a different route through environmental activism than the one that's currently being taken pretty well everywhere, certainly in Tasmania. So the context of my talk tonight is about Tasmania. It emanates from Tasmania, so I'm talking context specific. There are probably some peculiarities to do with Tasmania that probably aren't relevant here, although I suspect that many of them would be. And indeed, talking to people around the country as we've travelled this last month, I can see commonalities already. So I don't want to make promises that may not or could not be realised for contextual reasons or locational reasons. So I offer what I offer here as my experiences in the context of Tasmania that you may take ideas away from. As I say, the audits are with Marie, and you'll be able to delve into those too for further learning as your spirit takes you. Okay. community-based auditing is a tool whereby community can conduct disciplined and in-depth inquiry into issues of concern, and the inquiry process leads to documented outcomes and opens the potential for growth and increased competency. Citizens become part of the critical review processes. Now, the important thing about that occurred to me in my growth as a scientist activist was this difficulty whereby community tended to play their role. The experts played their role, the politicians played their role, and all together we played a role, the activists played their role, all together we played a role, and we played our roles impeccably well, which led to a kind of a mess where finger pointing, lack of understanding, lack of certainty, disconnection seemed to reign supreme. And so, as a player, as an actor in this context, I felt responsible for, as an activist at that stage, for what was happening. And by that time, in the early 1990s, I'd played a fairly hard-nosed role as an activist in Tasmania. And in one case, it took 7 years. There was a joint suing as a result of a pollution from a refuse disposal site that allegedly caused deformities in animals and stock and death of seagulls and so on. And this led to more of the same litigation. And I reflected on this, and each engagement that occurred in roughly a 10-year period prior to community-based auditing led to the same sorts of outcomes: more frustration, disenchantment, community feeling disconnected, disempowered, community coming to me when they'd exhausted all other avenues, a doctor-patient relationship, this hurts now, can you fix this for me? I've got an atrazine issue, or I've got a water pollution issue, or I've got whatever. And so I was constantly dealing almost one-to-one, case by case. And I figured there must be a more systemic way to try and deal with this problem of what it seemed to me to be community disempowerment and community at a loss as to what to do. And so therefore I sensed crisis in my practice, that I needed to change. And so this sent me on a journey, quite a long journey of self-inquiry into my practice, my worldview, my beliefs, and how could I deal with it and deal with this problem that I was in a context of which I was a reflection. I had become the thing that I was so eager to change. And I believe you find this so much in activism. And so there's the sort of inclusionality link, if you like, to try and deal with these problems. Okay, and so then by then it was the early 90s, as I mentioned, and I developed a thing called community-based sampling, which is the forerunner of community-based auditing, where community who'd come to me with their problem, water pollution or whatever, were trained. We trained citizens, some 100 citizens around the state, to undertake their own environmental sampling. Because what occurred to me at that early stage in my naive thinking was that community as being receivers of information, services, and seen as customers, the missing link was they needed to generate knowledge and information. So, and I interpreted that as being they need to generate data. And if they generate real life data that brings into question and brings debate, then that'll be the start of a positive process of potentially of change. So we trained people, and we had a couple of major upheavals. One was training community in the south of the state who had been complaining for many, many months about dust polluting from, or allegedly dust polluting their homes and things from a nearby factory, quite a large industrial complex. And I said, well, it's simple. If you've got a problem, you've been complaining about a problem, don't complain, go out and get a sample. Go out into the field, go out into this thing called reality and take a sample of it and look for what it is that you think you're concerned about. Or even don't do that, just do screens to see what could be there. Pretty simple. Everyone went, oh, that's new. We ought to do that. So we sampled soils on the pavement, on the grass pavements and in people's yards, and back came these high levels of cadmium and lead. And everybody went, oh, we better do something. So a whole crescendo of events occurred at both industry, government and state government level as to, oh, we've got a problem, Houston. And so that was my kind of initial foray into saying, well, what's missing here? Well, what's going on here, although I didn't specifically analyse it, is that community is a perception that is held of community and by community. Community see themselves as not really generators of knowledge. So I took it a step further and generated data, and from the data generated knowledge, which then led to debate. Rather than the activist way would be to jump up and down about the dust, jump up and down about the dust. We don't want dust. And so you've got an issue that can remain fairly fluid and people can be arguing the point backwards and forwards. Go and take a sample, turn that into some scientific data, and suddenly everybody's got a problem. And this I saw as a way of making change. So that was okay for a while. That worked for a while. And then after concluding that the community seemed to be left on the outside, a few of the community-based sampling issues seemed to work. The atrazine issue at Larina was another one where we used immunoassay to detect atrazine in the potable water supply. And although the level was below the state level, it was above the World Health level, and so we had a problem. The responsible corporation had to bring potable water into the citizens so they could have water to drink, because their argument was, common law argument, the stuff wasn't there before, it's there now, we don't want it, fix it. And so that then forces change. It has to, because you've got a common law right to have the clean supply that you originally had. Makes sense. And so gradually I could see activism taking a bit more of a sort of a step towards something else, beyond protest. Something a bit more empowering, where the citizens had the right end of the shovel, instead of on the receiving end, they were on the dishing end for a change. And so I saw this as very important. Still cast in the mould of what you would probably call a radical form of activism, where you were doing a lot of pushing, and based on this idea of citizens being told and citizens waiting to be told, even worse, waiting to be told, and not questioning. Because citizens are busy, they've got expectations, they've got an automatic role they've assumed in their society. They vote governments in and governments out at all sorts of levels, and you talk to most community, as far as they're concerned, it's job done. That's really where our role begins and ends. And there are some other strategies that are used, such as land care and water watch, to try and engage citizens. But a lot of those things are tending to deal with past mistakes and symptoms of issues, rather than getting to the cause of issues and trying to wrestle with them. So the move was on. It's now around about getting towards the late 1990s at this stage, as I begin to embrace these ideas begin to crystallise in my head. And one of the drivers was looking at what was happening in what's called post-normal science, where when I read post-normal science, I drew from that very quickly, from the work of Harding and others, and Jerry Rivetz and Silvio Fundowitz. I began to sort of think, well, hang on a minute, a way to kind of bring this right out would be to really find a way for citizens to not just generate the data and have a debate about the data, but to generate data that questions the certainty of science. So it was an epistemological problem of how do we get to question the very thing that the experts and governments base their certainty on. So the flame was then lit. I knew then I was on a winner. This is something that could cause unravelment, but I needed to package that. I needed to package it so it looked and was a serious animal in the jungle for the oppositions, the governments, the industry, who saw this thing as, oh my God, it's real, but was accessible by the citizenry, and met these other agenda that came out as the thing unfolded. I had to give it a methodology, and I used participatory action research as my tool of engagement to bring community into a learning process whereby, as I mentioned in the first slide there, that we learn together, reflect together, make change together, and then go back through a cycle of experiential learning, and trying to engage citizens as not just the active data generators and active protesters and alert makers, but to help them in this new form of activism that was identified by Carson and others as what we call active inquirers. It's a form of activism, but we call them the inquirers. Okay, so they're not just concerned citizens anymore. They're not reformers so much, but they can be. They're not data generators and data providers and message senders, but they're actually inquirers. They delve, they dig, they question, and they keep on questioning, and they unearth uncertainty. They're uncertainty, they find uncertainty and raise it to the surface. Okay, so I'm currently doing some research on it. Now, what we do, just to come back to the methodology, I'll just give you an overview of a very quick snapshot, a bit of history. Feel free to jump in. If I'm not clear, jump in and stop me and I'll explain in more detail as I go through. We've gone through methodology now. The best way to handle this from here on is to take it through a couple of cases where we've used community-based auditing. Right? Now, one of the tools that is used in community-based auditing is a form of environmental auditing. It's a very useful form. I don't use it as a prescription, but use it more as a guide, which we've sourced from the internet. It's ISO 14001 is the audit framework, right? And the thing about ISO 14001 is it gives a framework where people who are investigating environmental quality actually get to ask questions about the nature of environmental projects, or the nature of projects, and these projects may involve environmental processes such as environmental management systems, DP and EMPs, and so on. And so it then gives the stakeholder, particularly where these operations are taking place in public land or interface with things like public potable waters or soils or forests or whatever, natural resource management, it enables the citizenry or anybody to begin to inquire into the management prescriptions used in projects. So it's a process where you can look at the aspects and impacts that have been identified in a proposal, or you can look at the proposal aspects and impacts, in other words, what they propose to do and what is likely to be the positive or negative impacts, and you can say, you haven't covered them all, I've got a whole suite here because I live in this locality and there are things that you've missed or haven't seen that I think that we as a community think are important, that should be listed. Here they are listed, we need these inquired into. So it's a very flexible way of doing environmental audits and inquiries that is not necessarily prescriptive. It invites input from local contexts. So this process of using this auditing framework as part of the overall community-based auditing helped lend an air of authority to the process, because the ISO standards are world-class, much sought after, good if you can actually use them and use them well, and adds to credibility, and the perception is all important. So there's a lot of psychology in this. There's a lot of psychology in this. Okay, so that gives you a rough idea of the frame. So we've got action research process for engagement, and we've got a toolbox. We've got ISO 14001 we can refer to, we've got community-based sampling we can use if we want, and we've got all these other things that hang out of the toolbox of inquiry, which is all on the DVD that I've given Marie. So, and I don't want to labour those things too much, there's just a bunch of tools that come out of that, as there would be in any methodology. All right? Okay, let's look at a couple of interesting case studies. There are a number I'll refer to, so I'll crisscross a bit, and I don't want to lose you with this. I hope I haven't lost you so far, but I don't want to lose you as I crisscross with some of these. But I'll start with because Jack's raised this is an important question. I think it is a really important question, this question of engagement and so on. So I'll start right there with a general introduction about engagement of your community. Here we go. This is a really important point. It's the guts of the process. It's where all the work takes place. It's where most of the angst takes place. It's where a lot of the heartache takes place. How do I know I'm representing my community? It's one of those itchy ethical questions that hopefully every activist face. But not a lot of activists do, because they go out into the field and they come back with tales from the field saying, you know, we won or we didn't lose or we could have done better, but seldom is the question asked, how did I understand the community of attachment? Do I understand those who I'm acting on behalf of? What are my claims? Are they my claims only or the claims of others? How do I know? This weighs heavily on us and has weighed heavily on us as myself and my small team worked with community-based auditing. This was a really and I can't overemphasise it enough, is a really tough cross to bear, because who am I acting on behalf of and with what consequences is really, really important. We talk about it in the audits, in the collection. So what we try and do is the chicken and egg thing. And I'll give you the example now, because this is where this one comes from, of the dam project. Not D-A-M-B, but the dam project, capital D-A-M, water storage in the northeast of Tasmania. Okay. The powers that be, the people that normally make the decisions, got together and said, we need a series of dams across the landscape because we've got to have irrigation, because we've got climate change, because we've had a lot of very dry years. And the way to insulate ourselves, to protect ourselves, bulletproof ourselves, is to have this string of dams. And they're going to be megalitres of this stuff sitting in the landscape. And we're going to feed a great big dairy. That's one big project. I've got to have this dairy. Doesn't matter how lumpy and how variable the dairying industry's been in the past, we see a new future. And so, in a situation where there have been layoffs and company shutdowns and things going wrong, federal and state money handed out hand over fist to keep things going and then only to see things fall, the community would be fairly malleable to the suggestion that we needed to do this. The community would be fairly almost a foregone conclusion. Fine, great idea. We then get a call that the people, the experts, the consultants have been doing the rounds and turning up to people's doors, knocking on the door with the clipboard, ready to go. We hear about the dam. And the person at the door, the owner, says, what dam? Well, the dam that's going to be down there. What dam down there? Well, we're going to put a dam down there, for the water storage. And the person at the door, the owner says, but I haven't heard, but that's my land. Yeah, well, we're only looking initially at putting a dam. We're not ready to sort of decided yet. Yeah, but what am I going to do if you flood that, And this happened to a number of people. And so, the same old. We know what's best, don't tell them too much, but just let them know gently, and, they'll get over the shock, and then it'll, as these things do, it'll all kind of happen, in its own time, as we all know. But a few citizens got together and said, well, we're not really happy with it. We're not happy. The initial bug was, of course, the lack of consultation. So everyone got all hot under the collar and angry and angsty about it. And we then encouraged letters to the editor so that the issue was then made topical. At that early stage, we felt we had a warrant that the community could play a role in escalating the issue, and we assisted people to get their issue up about the lack of consultation. And so they were pretty hot under the collar about that. So there was a rash of letters went into the local northeastern newspaper. And so we had what we then call an issue, which in good old activist terms is beauty. It's a hot topic. Someone's harpooned a whale, we've got an issue. We can kick butt. Great. Everyone's upset, everyone's annoyed. We could be on a winner. Yeah? That's how it works, isn't it? Get them flustered, get them annoyed, generate a difference between what is and what could be, and you've got this thing called an issue. And that's the only engine you really usually need, isn't it, to get people fired up. We wanted to go a step further. We said, okay, we've got an issue, people are hot under the collar about consultation, but that's part of something deeper. There's something deeper wrong here than just consultation. And so what do?
Cancel.
Just push cancel?
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to do it?
I can't see without my glasses. Where are my glasses?
It's okay.
Escape or cancel?
No.
Well, where's cancel?
It's all right, Marie will do it. Yeah.
Give the mouse.
It's all right.
Am I wrong?
No, you put the kids.
Oh, in there, sorry, yeah. I've got my wrong.
No, we're not doing any tech.
I don't want to do anything wrong.
All right.
Okay, that's good. And so we just wanted to go a little bit deeper than just the symptom. There's a whole lot of stuff going on here. At that stage, we hadn't done a lot of work on dams. We'd had a few issues a couple of years before on irrigation pool from one great big river, the Forester River, and that was an interesting exercise. But in this particular case, we felt, having talked to people, that perhaps what we needed to do was just be really clear about our mandate. So we ran a mail out survey to there's a full report in there. Some 600 residents randomly around there. It was a complex municipality, several catchments across what we call catchments across the municipality. Little towns here, little towns there. There's a rural component, there's an industry component, there's town residential components and so on, and then crossovers of all of those. So we had to try and sample reasonably well. So we got a reasonable return from that, not a big return, and we looked at that data. We didn't massage the data too much, we didn't interpret it too much, we just took it for what it is, and we asked very open-ended questions, not about irrigation, but about the broad questions about where do you think the municipality is going, what do you think the history looks like, what do you think the future might look like, and so on. And from there, we then we felt, well, we still really haven't got a clear mandate. We need something more. So then we then trained some university students to go out and do what we call street corner interviews at different times to sample the demographic. The farmers who are going into the local co-op to do their business, the school kids coming out, the housewives going to the supermarket, the people going to banks and things on pension a day, and then all the normal, just various centres. And from that we generated a fairly rich picture of what the community was thinking, and what was really interesting is the gaps, the lack of knowledge, And in this game, it's not what is said that's probably important, it's what's not said, or what people don't seem to know, or what they don't seem to be aware of, was as important as, an unknown's as good as a known. And so we use that information and we say, well, okay, we have got a mandate here to call some public meetings, some forums, to have discussions about where we think we're going here. And from that came a working group who they formed up called What's Best for Dorset, which is the municipality in Tasmania. And so they've gone off to do things for What's Best for Dorset. But it was really interesting that some of the ideas that came up we've got a facilitator in, so we had a World Cafe type style forum. And it was about generating conversations and discussions. Just went to the local hall, North Scottsdale Hall, a good old Aussie hall, and we put on a day. And talking to housewives and things, people who one lady came, she said to me, "I'm just a housewife, but I'm just a housewife, for heaven's sake. I'm just a housewife, but this is what I think." And so gems came out like, well, if we're going to put dams in, couldn't they be sort of like water resource areas where we could have tourism and fishing and still use them for irrigation, but could we have water skiing? Could we have a helipad for tourists? Could we have woodlots? Absolutely fabulous. And here it is. We're doing all this pro bono. The experts had their go. The Chamber of Commerce and every man and his dog had their go. And the best they can do is turn up with a clipboard, unannounced on the day, and talk about the dam that's going to go down the back. So, message is, it's hard work, but community consultation works. And it's about starting conversations.
Sorry, Philip, how long did it take before these ideas started coming out?
The ideas start very quickly. They start very quickly, but in our little group, Tasmanian Community Resource Auditors, we saw ourselves as facilitators of discussion and conversation, not wanting to jump in and do it on behalf of the community. It is really important. When this was written up, a couple of people from Dorset Water Watch, the local Water Watch group, and a couple of others individuals, and I think I co-authored one as well, were very keen to tell its story, but also very keen to look to a where to from here in terms of who would pick up the mantle. And a group coalesced around this issue. But they coalesced around a number of issues that also came out as a result of the surveys, and indeed as a result of the facilitated day's discussion. So it kind of leads to something. Now, what the community does with that is all part of the experiment. You can't really... There's no knowing. That process is still going on now, as I understand. Right, so that's just one example that comes to this question, or tries to come to grips with this question of warrant and authority to act, and to sense where community's at, and to help them take those next steps without necessarily putting the do list up front. That's their job. So that is that's just one example that I give now. I'll give another quick example. Yeah, sure.
You told us about the sort of enthusiasm and the idea generation for the project. What happened to the people that were saying, I'm not sure I want it on my land, or how will this affect anything else that I'm doing?
Yeah, okay.
In other words, the objections.
That's right. Well, a number of those become part of another group called Community Futures Network. There were a couple of people, 3 people who felt strongly about having dams on private property. And a couple of those people, one of those people had a nature conservation area on their farm, and there were lots of debates and discussions about whether a proposal to put a dam on that land, or have dam water encroaching on that conservation area, on that covenant area, was in fact legal, was in fact, kosher in terms of state and federal law. So that was a kind of an interesting. It's just empowering people to have those conversations and go off and have those debates. So a number of the people who felt that they were going to be affected went off and had those, made those inquiries via this group. But because of the direction of the conversation, there may have been some creative solutions in terms of, I don't want that bit of my farm. Questions about compensation, questions about the layout of and roading and tourism. So there was flexibility in there. There was a prospect for conversations to occur whereby innovative and creative solutions could have been found, rather than having and I'll tell you another case in a moment where things were similar, rather than just, we're going to do it.
Are they not still in the hands of the experts a bit? On the geology, how many dams, the water flow?
Precisely. Yeah, and I'll touch on that.
Right.
Because at that stage we didn't have a proposal. The proponents had not issued a proposal as such. It was still right up there at that very ethereal sort of we're scoping, we're having a look. And people that we were dealing with in the community felt that, the backroom deal's already been done, it's fait accompli, and this is just a bit of easing us into the idea. And so we had to kind of work with people to pull them back from that sort of sense of negativity, to that sense of, it's a lay down, misere, it's going to happen, we're powerless, there's nothing we can do, to kind of pull them down from that, to say, what is your issue? What is your concern? Why is it a concern to you? And what do we need to do then towards the future to fix it or do whatever? So encouraging the community just to be a bit more critical about that, although they're the ones affected, and it's a pretty horrendous feeling if you've ever been affected by a development proposal right on your doorstep, and I'll give you some examples. It's a pretty disempowering thing. Someone turns up with a clipboard, you're a housewife, and we're going to put the dam down there. It's right here, isn't it? You sort of, what? I've worked for 50 years to get this, or my family had it, or it's like being oversprayed, with a crop duster, and seeing that yellow slime drip down your windows. It's pretty terrible. And public are really badly affected by that. It's a very emotional thing. And so I'm not saying the activists are here, it's okay, don't you worry, we can fix this. There's a tendency to do that, and good old activist repertoire would sort of say you can do that, they're here. But no, we come in and say we're here, but we've all got some work to do together here to bring about change. And you're going to be part of the change process, because we can't do it all. We're not going to do it all. We're going to use our experts, because experts on tap, not on top. And I'll talk about another issue in a moment that was similar. I'll leave it up as a backdrop. If it's not too boring for people, I'll leave it up as a backdrop. And I'll tell you about another issue that where there was a plan, where there was a proposal. A proponent had issued a proposal. It's the very first audit in the collection that Marie's got off the discs there. This was in 2000. This happened it was the very start of community-based auditing, this one. This particular one here was a bit further through the process. I just wanted to give you the good before the not so good. How pear-shaped it can go is as follows. The proponent puts forward a proposal. It's a proposal to clear fill a logging coop. The logging coop is in a high rainfall, steep upper catchment area. And this is the very reason in 2000 when we formed our little journal, Upper Catchment Issues Tasmania, which is our journal that the community write to. This is why we call it Upper Catchment Issues Tasmania, because a lot of these issues were occurring in what we call the kidneys of the catchments, in the upper catchments, where the water's created, purified and delivered as a sparkling, beautifully tasting Adam's ale to a receptive public who enjoy good health and vigour from the catchments. Some would say not so. This guy's on drugs. But Clearfelling, water generation area. Next door, an organic farm. It's a biodynamic farm. It was certified with the Tasmanian Organic Dynamic Producers. I was the inspector. I wrote their quality system. The Tasmanian Organic Dynamic Producers is a certification body under the Australian Organic and Biodynamic Produce Standard. And that standard is an industry government cooperative document that is bolted into what we call the Federal Export Control Orders. And the Export Control Orders are a government-to-government instrument for those countries that we export to. So what we say had better be right in terms of a product that's labelled organic, that's exported to, say, Japan. When they open the container up and take a sample of potato or carrot or beef and analyse it for specified parameters, they'd better be within range, or they'd better be either absent or very, very low. Or else you get a red sticker, and not only is the farmer quarantined out of it, but the whole industry could be suspended certificate. So the stakes were very high, to use a post-normal term, for getting it wrong. And so having a forestry coup right next to an organic farm immediately raises alarms. The people owning the farm contacted me at that stage, the very first audit, with a concern about what was happening. So the first thing I went up to do with them was to look at the status of their accreditation, make sure their certificate was live, and find out when the last audit was conducted, and to generally look at the site. The other complication is that the farming family on the organic farm had an agreement with the proponent for some time, a standing agreement, to source their potable water from a streamlet up in the coop. And so lots of questions about, well, you're going to use chemicals when you clear fill it, are you going to naturally regenerate it? If you want to put Knighton's plantation, eucalyptus Knighton's, which is the plantation or the tree of choice in a lot of these areas, it's kind of one of these monocultural, every tree is the same type thing for all sorts of reasons. Are you going to spray for insects when those trees are starting to grow? Are you going to put down 1080 for vermin because they're going to be grazed? They're going to be grazed by possum and wallaby and stuff. And what about fertiliser? You're going to give them a kickstart with some NPK? And so what if all this gets in the water supply and gets onto my farm? Will I lose my certification status? In other words, how certain are you? Well, everyone in science knows we're all certain. That's why we're scientists. It's our job to be certain. We think, perhaps, most of the time. Anyway, thalidomide, nuclear, breast implants, need I go on? It was certain. Certainly certain, we're uncertain. So we figured, and I was being sort of howled at by the certifier, by the grower, please, you've got to do something. We've tried to talk to the proponent, and they're kind of going, price practices plan in place, done it heaps of times before, bread and butter, no problems, easy. You're going to be fine. So we said, right, and I just completed some work on auditing because I was an internal auditor in industry. And I was auditing using a thing called ISO 9000 at that stage. And I just wanted to be able to, and this is where the science bit comes in, it's really interesting. I wanted to be, because I was acting on behalf of a client, the people that owned the farm, I wanted to be sure that I had something to hold on to, because, what if it goes to court? And so as a scientist you tend to become sort of strictured fairly early as you try to get the framework right so you can initiate an inquiry. And all the time, of course, time's going on. So I started looking at the situation, and on paper, the proposal looked fairly good. It was supported by best available knowledge. They had top soil scientists on there. They had nature conservation people. The code itself, the Forest Practices Act, that gives birth to a Forest Practices Code, which encodes the instructions to produce a Forest Practices Plan or a set of prescriptions to manage the site, was all very clear. It was all really nice, glossy paper and good clauses and pretty watertight. And I thought, well, this is pushing it, and I went back through as much as I could through the appeals and tried to see how many appeals actually got up. If things went pear-shaped, who won, who lost, and it was all a bit sort of patchy as to, the big boys get into play and goes to a hearing, and it can get pretty messy, and government one, public naught sort of thing, when you look at the slope. So I was being realistic to my customer client at that stage, because I was doing it pro bono, and I was saying, look, is there some way, if you're sure you've gone through all this with them, they're saying we know what we're doing. So I went away and thought about this. I had about a month to think about it, and I was talking to some other colleagues who've been working in environmental issues as activists similar to me up to that point. And we were normally used to the sort of lethal punch approach to activism. You hit them first, you hit them really hard first, so that you're in a situation of command from the word go, using shock techniques. You discover something new, or you make a big deal about something, and they get all scared and go away. And I thought, well, that might work in this situation, as with the cadmium and lead in the big factory. But it's a pretty big king hit, isn't it? You cop one of those once a month, and you're not going to come back into the bar, are you? Because you know that it's not the place to be, and you're going to lose as soon as you walk in, yeah? So, but I figured that's not learning. That's winning, which is really good for a Euro male, a spear thrower, to win, because that's what Euro males do. That's what we like that, aren't we? We are aggressors. But I thought, well, that's not helping the situation. That's not helping. That's not even helping the proponent. The proponent learn about things. We need something new. And so I figured, well, the thoughts from the community-based sampling, perhaps we could put a few things together here, and we could actually, why don't we audit the proponent's proposal? Like do a desk audit first, and then maybe even sort of sneak into the field and do some sampling. And so a group of us coalesced around that problem. There was the problem of the coop, but there was a problem of how to inquire into what was going on. So there were two problems we had. And so my experience with action research kind of helped us, in our own little process, begin to work out what to do, how to handle documentation, how to handle meetings, all the housekeeping stuff that's so messy that as an activist you go, I want to get to the coalface, I don't want to be messing around with meetings, documents and retrieval of documents and certified letters and all this. But that was the core of it. Keeping track of the documentation, keeping track of the arguments, keeping track of the questioning was a really important part of it. And so what we did a desk audit. And different ones in the group said, look, I know a professor here, and I know somebody there, and I know somebody over here who'd be willing to look at this. They're an expert, the Water Watch people, they're an expert in entomology, or somebody's an expert hydrologist or something. So we began to sort of peer review, in a post-normal sense, the document before us, just what's called a desktop audit. So we sent this document out, and it took a fair bit of getting this document too, my bad. Not an easy thing to do, but because it was a public body or a corporation, they were compelled to show something to the next door neighbour, which you'd expect is a common law requirement that if you were going to do something next door and someone had a concern, you would have to explain what you were doing in some reasonable degree of detail. And so that's what happened. And so back the audits, the responses came from our experts, and that's where the experts were used. Concerns. One expert said, I know the granodiorite soils in this area. I've done pioneering work with granodiorite soils, and I've got some concerns about the infiltration rates.
About the what?
Infiltration rates. The rate at which water percolates through soil.
Right.
Somebody else come back with, I've had experience with nature conservation in these high altitude areas, and I'm concerned about this and that species, burrowing crayfish or whatever they were. Somebody else come back with this, and I've had a lot of experience in these areas, and I'm just not sure about eroding, for example. So a number of issues came up, and so we then went back to the group, we looked at these issues in some detail, and we said, okay, well, let's in fairness go back to the proponent and say, look, you know, there are concerns. Have you thought this through? No problems. Thought through. All the letters are in the first audit. The letters to and from then become almost proofs of evidence of exchange of letters where you ask, they said, you ask, they said, you ask, until you reach a closeout where it's clear that the other party isn't really sure what they're talking about. Right? So you actually drilled out of the certainty. You've actually drilled through the floor of certainty. And that's the goal of this method. You've got to stay in the saddle because it's not an easy ride. But we drilled through that and we got that. So then we went to the site and we did some infiltration rates. And the infiltration rates were way different. That was the first thing. And we did some other critical observations which were way different. And so we were then able to actually write the audit. So we then wrote the audit and circulated the audit. And then, because of the level of community concern about this issue, we then had an information day where we invited all parties, including community. We had half a day presentation by our expert, by the community group and their experts as to what they found. And then we put everybody in buses and took them up to the site to show them just right at the coalface what was really going on. So, you know, shock horror and all the normal things, people gasping, how could this be? And then the waters calmed for a while. The whatever it was, 3-week deadline to start logging ended up weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks. There was no logging. And so where it ended, and this is the power of this thing, where it ended was a hearing. And what we've got in Tasmania is, you know, when the parties find themselves at loggerheads and things can't be sort of resolved in any way, shape or form, we have this thing where we have like an appeals tribunal hearing. And, you know, His Grace sits up the front and people give their arguments and then they make a decision. So I thought, well, this is a watershed moment. It's a test of methodology at that stage, which was just fledgling. It's a test of, you know, the community feeling as well. You know, where the community thought it should go. The debate about clear filling in upper catchments was kind of on the table. The community had also had sought other experts in forest management and had put a proposal up to manage the forest using single stem harvesting techniques such as pro-silver. So in every audit we encourage people to, yep, sure, express your concerns, give your arguments, but we really encourage you to where to from here in your argument. In other words, it can be no, that's up to you, but if we can find a way around it, then let's talk about that too. And what they talked about, they put on the table pro-silver, which is in the first audit, it's actually a methodology for single stem management of forests for a range of values, tourism, hardwood timbers, softwood timbers, whatever's there. It can be anything you want, but you don't clear fill. So the next door neighbour and members of the community felt that approach would be worth considering. They were happy to talk. The proponent, not happy to talk about that because it was a threat to the paradigm, the dominant paradigm of we know what's going on, we're in charge, we're forest, you know, a bit like the tree thing, you know, we are what needs to be forest. Forests are us. And along comes the community saying, you know, I don't like the quality of your science. I think there's some gaps. I think there are some assumptions you made that don't hold, pardon the pun, water. So it gets to the tribunal. The proponent withdraws the proposal and walks off. Now, it's a win. It may not be a win. But the joy of it is when you talk to people behind the scenes who call you up and say to you, this has been really powerful learning. You know that it's about small changes. When officers and different ones, local council people say to you, that was really well done. You know, it's not just people going spare about their little issue of concern. This was about something much bigger that people got their head around. Then that's the power of this. It's about small changes. And so that's just a couple of examples of how the process works. Okay. When we go through, and I've got a couple of these to show you now. We've been through that about the clear statement, as we did with that case study. Stop me if you need to talk about any of these. I'll talk about them. But the clear documented information that begins with the community. What is the problem? What do you think the problem is? Because the community comes to you as an expert, like a patient to a doctor. It hurts here. What do you think's wrong with you? Well, that's part of the situation. But a good doctor says, well, I've got thoughts. Well, what do you think's wrong? Not just with the sore belly or the sore knee, but are there bigger issues here? I can treat the sore belly, no problem. But what if you come back next week with the doctor's got an inkling that there's something else more systemically wrong here? And so it's a discussion then about the matter of health, not just where it hurts. And so we try and work with community to say, well, what do you think the problem is? What's at stake? What will happen if it can't be dealt with? And thirdly, what if there's an alternative or a way out of it, what do you think that could possibly look like? No firm answers. Do you think there could be a way out of this? So it's de-steaming people, just like a big train engine with a thumping head of steam, and you're saying it's going to blow, we've just got to take some pressure off that because we're not going to get anywhere here. So you just take the steam out of it, you take the heat out of it, let some light in. And people are pretty steamed up most of the time when these things kind of happen. And designing inquiry processes that seek to open debate and community involvement. Now, this is a two-way street. We don't come to it with, like a barrister, with all the facts under the arm. We come to it fairly open, and each case can be slightly different in the way it unfolds and progresses. So it's very context within context dependent. We don't tend to have, you're okay, recipe 5, this is what you do. Step 6, why aren't you here? It's more engaging than that, so people can feel at least some ownership. And I'm not saying that works every time, but we try and encourage people to be thinking along those lines about what their role is in the change process, both in looking at the matter of concern, but also the changes that could be occurring within them as they become more competent practitioners. And people, so-called ordinary citizens, are pretty amazing. In my experience in this last 10 years, the 10 years before was the same. You'd be blown away on a regular basis by just how smart and how savvy people were. But emotions get tangled in there, and you've got to try and say, well, yeah, it's great to be passionate, you've got to be angry, you've got to be annoyed, you've got to be concerned, but we just need to take some time now to put you back on top and not make you feel as though you're being swept along. And that can take some time, because people do feel swept along. And then this business here, where we formed a journal to help people to tell their story. There's nothing more difficult, is there, if you've done a thesis? Anybody's done a thesis, you all have, I know. But you say, I've got a great idea this morning. I woke up and I've got this absolute cracker of an idea. Sit down and try and write it down. Oh my God. 5 lines and you're going, I can't get it out. It's in there. I've got to get it out. At least that's the angst that I go through when I write. And I think it's true. You've got a concern, you've got an issue. Try writing it down. It's like nothing on earth. It is just. And in one way, it's a fortunate thing, because that's where the winnowing takes place. When the print is staring you back in the face, that's when the real test takes place. Do I know what I'm talking about? Do I really know what my concern is? And a lot of people, they're just totally bugged at authority. Many people are bugged at authority, or bugged at being told what to do. And it takes a while to break through that, to get over that anger and get to the real issue of concern. It's very therapeutic, and it's wonderful when you're in a group setting as well. We used to have workshops to discuss these kind of things, not didactically, but just involving people with kicking around their concerns and ideas. And people come to that saying, we spent half an hour, we haven't decided anything yet. You get the proactive type, the sort of, the pseudo leader who wants to sort of take it to a different place. I'm busy. It might take an hour or two to get to the. And that takes a lot of getting used to. It can be very frustrating for a facilitator, where it's completely open-ended and you don't know where it's going to go. It's like the street corner surveys. You don't know what answers you're going to get because you haven't preconceived anything. So they might just tell you to piss off. Who are you? And this is a debate we used to have with our little group. What answer do you think we'll get? I don't know. Isn't it wonderful? Isn't it just wonderful? And so this is the joy of it. People are pissed off, they're angry, or they want change, but I'm not sure, and they're not sure, and nobody's really sure what that involves and what it means even. And so you can only really do your survey, get a warrant and start a conversation. If action comes from that, that's great. I mean, if it's a red hot issue, life and death thing, then fine, it's pretty clear cut. But most of the time, it's not. And so what you find is the wheels fall off, and then in not many moons, they're back to the table again with that same old problem. Doctor, my stomach hurts. Well, we talked about that. you know, don't eat rat sack. I told you. And so it's this kind of mind and learning from that as well as a practitioner. Because if you're being paid for it, you can make a lot of money by just playing it as it is. But as facilitators and change agents, we don't want that. We don't want the patient back in again. We don't even want to see them again. We want to know they're happy and they're self-fulfilled and they've taken their own trajectory. So it's a one-off payment of time in the hope that that conversation will process and proceed to something else. Okay, jump in. Don't let me waffle on too much. And so it's a very rough sort of cycle. This is not the way it kind of happens, but I've just put a bit of a model, a bit of a map in about how this process kind of roughly works, and the idea of the survey and to nut out this thing called community of attachment, because there's a big debate, isn't there, in social science, and who's this thing called community, and so we don't sort of hang up, you don't get hung up on that. We kind of say, well, a community of attachment can be kind of, a log truck driver can be just as attached to a municipality as a person who has a dairy farm right near that river, or a person who enjoys fly fishing in that river. They're all members, they're all attached in one way or another to a part of this community. So we kind of let that free wheel a bit. So when we sample, when we talk to people, we try to bear that in mind, that we are not necessarily talking to somebody who may live in this location, but someone who may, for a variety of reasons, frequent this location and have just as much right to owning that location as anybody else. So they're important to hear from. So we don't try and exclude them. We try and be inclusional with those people. It's really important. This whole idea of communities can be troublesome in this sort of work. And so, issues, problems, new idea. It may just arise as a new idea. It may not be an issue. The thing may arise because people have a good idea. And we've had a couple of those. Person wanted to set up farmers markets in Scottsdale, northern Tasmania. That was a new idea, just come out of left field. This is what I'd like to do, I think it's going to be good. And so, you didn't have to fall off the horse first to create an issue. It actually just arrived brand new, and the person had, so, okay, where do we go? Oh, well, you couple that with a group that you form with Directions for Dorset, and that's another input and another agenda item for change in the Directions for Dorset group who had actually formed around other issues. The significance of the issue, and this is where we come in, whose issue is it? Need for mandates. For example, you might have an idea about farmers markets. Well, is that idea in anybody else's head? If it's not, then what sort of ways could you perhaps, what sort of ideas would you have to actually put that out there so people could begin to think about it without being badgered into it? There may be hundreds of variations on the theme, community-supported agriculture, vegetable boxes, whatever. And so encouraging people to be open and receptive to, sure, it's your baby, but sometime that dove's got to fly. So you've got to kind of release those ideas back into the community and share and contribute. Citizens trained, supported to do inquiry and get their own mandates. I talked about the surveys, the inquiries, bringing it back out into community again with workshops and seminars. So it's reporting back to your broader community. It's one thing to do your surveys and so on, but there's a little tick box there that says, would you be prepared to be involved in workshops and seminars, and do you mind if we anonymously feed back to the community your concerns and comments, whatever. And so this is kind of like a subtle report back to your broader community, so they're informed. So it's a pretty exhaustive process. And then we've got these outputs, what to do. So the formation of smaller groups and working parties and ideas people. For example, the one with the dams, we had a couple of intersecting issues. One to do with the Astacopsis gouldi, which is the Tasmanian freshwater lobster, and the dry up of rivers and their mortalities linked to irrigation. So there are a number of intersecting issues, water use, water quality, water quantity, these kind of issues. And so finding out who would be prepared to play a role in those issues as community self-organisers. And then whatever comes out of that, new issues come out of that. So problems with legislation, problems with enacting legislation and so on.
Ken, do you want to?
Phil, perhaps this would be a time. Well, when you started talking to us, the very first slide you put up, you talked about citizens receiving,
yes,
being on the receiving end of decisions and so on, and of services and goods. Well, what I felt I wanted to substitute for receiving was consuming.
Yeah, they are consumers. That's right.
And there's so much politics in this, which is highly relevant in the UK at the moment, and in Bath.
Yes.
For instance, I went to a talk by an assistant chief constable who actually told me that I was a consumer of police services. And where is the citizenship?
Exactly.
So you're back to market economies.
Yeah, that's right.
And all the politics of that. So the very idea of reviving citizenship, it could be a way of turning round the nature of public service,
Yeah.
right? and the mindset of the people who are delivering it. So that it's citizen with citizen rather than we're the great providers.
That's right.
It's actually our town.
Exactly.
You're the consumers, we're the citizens.
And the citizens are ultimately responsible.
That was occurring to me. The other was spot on, the question, what is community? If, with your water extraction, and the issues seem to be containable within a particular locality, so that you can actually mobilise. So if you've got what some of us were talking about, the discovery of, and you'll be able to tell us more about this, discovery of natural gas beneath the Mendip Hills here, which would involve massive extraction, huge investment, and every kind of community destruction available. How do you actually create this on a larger scale? And have you had situations where you have a problem between communities? One community is happy with it, it resolves your problems, but not down the road. So then you get involved in more than one community, or the two different kinds of competing activists arguing different things and so on.
Yeah, well, we do. For example, the forestry type issues. You've got community. Within a broad community, you've got fors and against, because people working in the industry and being supported by the industry, versus others who see a different future, and so both concerns are very real. And in an industry where people have structured whole livelihoods and whole industries have been built around, for example, forestry industry, or it can be dairying or whatever, those concerns are legitimate, are indeed important, as are the ones for the people who look back, who are paying for it all and saying, well, we've had to do bailouts, taxpayer dollars, not just thousands but millions. We've got concerns too as to where this is all going. What does it all really mean? And so none of that's easy, but it's about commencing the conversations early. I think it's about commencing conversations early. That's my personal view. But there's still work to be done to engage community in, the thing we found when we had the picnic in the Clearfield, which went back to earlier days when we'd really raised the debate about clear felling in catchments, and our expert hydrologist that reviewed a particular proposal.
Clear felling is taking
it's just taking everything off and then putting nitens back on.
Putting what?
Eucalyptus
particular
nitens.
monoculture.
Yeah. And he came back with a real zinger, and it hadn't been done much. It hadn't been sort of brought up into the public, into the discourse. It was really important. That kind of unified community in many ways, and that was the expert hydrologist looked at the situation and said, look, you know, there are parallels here with problems in Victoria and other parts of Australia where we put these monocultures in large areas in upper catchments, and we find that we actually have a situation where water yield is significantly depressed, right? And so there are consequences there for, of course, water volume, feeding streams where there are threatened species, and what we call the protected environmental flows of streams. There are consequences potentially for water quality. So in the summer, less water, you know, potentially more nutrients and sediment, so there's a concentration effect. There is also a consequence with those young plantations growing where a lot of the organic matter's been either removed or disturbed, where we have really high runoff rates. So you've got erosion and you've got flooding problems potentially, because where you had a peak like that, you've suddenly got a peak like that in time off the catchment. And so those and other concerns, and the way we had cautiously unearthed the uncertainty in this whole approach to forest management in upper catchments by showing simply that you know, we walked a coupe and we found more class 3 streams than were actually logged on the proponent's proposal was a bit of a bombshell. Why? Because they used general theory about the site to make their conclusions, whereas we actually appreciated the uniqueness, potential uniqueness of the site, and actually walked the site. And so when this was all brought together, we had what we called the picnic in the Clearfield, where everybody was invited up, forestry people, log truck drivers, contractors, and it was a bit like, it reminded me of a story my grandfather told me about the First World War, when they, on the Western Front, in the lull in the fighting, they were throwing food parcels across to each other. And he said, I saw my first German. And he said they weren't hairy and they weren't animals, they were just like me. He said, I nearly died. A young fellow, hadn't been there long, and here are these Germans that were supposedly so horrible. And he said, I nearly died. And I had to sort of, when the conflict started again, I had to shoot at these fellows. And what's worse, I was deployed as a sniper. He said, that killed me. I didn't have to shoot me. And so this is the important thing, is when we got all those people together, the activists and community members and the loggers and everybody together, and they started the conversation, they were closer than they actually thought.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sorry, Phil. Oh, sorry. Alan, do you want to go first?
Well, I was just sort of, in a way, sort of wondering whether we might go a little bit deeper. And I wondered if you might think of yourself as a community psychotherapist. And that actually what you're engendering is a subtle shift in people's understanding of their own identity in the context of their neighbourhood. And that's really the essence of what's going on in this process, is you're shifting people out of a form of self-perception which is oppositional into essentially one which is more of a sense of self-identity as an inclusion of other, which is kind of the inclusional aspect of what you're doing. But somehow or other, the process that you're describing, I see that as a kind of implicit process of bringing people into a different kind of awareness of their identity in relation to themselves and to other. I just wondered, in a way, it's almost a psychotherapeutic technique that you're using.
I guess it is. It brings people, because we don't start. I mean, in the early days, it was that classic activist type approach where it was them and us, and there were targets and things to be achieved. But as it evolved, it did evolve more towards that more open process where people try and find a safe place for people to begin the conversation, because it's like everything. People have got to feel safe. And when they don't feel safe is when they start doing things that are counterproductive to themselves and simply reinforce the stereotype of types that exist in this sort of game. So I guess it's to some extent that's right. I haven't really analysed it that deeply yet. I guess.
I'm also sort of seeing it in terms of the different ways that we think about evolutionary process, and as you know, I think that real evolutionary processes are always co-creative and improvisational, and that but we've been brought up with an idea of selective evolutionary processes, which is essentially a quest for supremacy instead of a quest for sustainability. And there essentially is almost this shift going on from starting off with a mindset which is all about supremacy, winning, losing, all the oppositional, and shifting that into actually what is sustainable. And encouraging a co-creative process through a specific methodology which you've described. So you've got a methodology which is actually relating to an underlying idea about evolutionary processes that are co-creative and involving bringing into use the diversity of the community.
Well, that's where it's going, and one tries to bring in and I use the term advisedly, but the sort of other side, if you like. It tries to see it as a whole community, which is not
W, of course.
which is not always easy, because as I try and explain to community members in workshops when they're fairly hot under the collar over a forestry operation, or they've been oversprayed or whatever, and I'll relate another story very quickly to you in a few minutes when I show you the other audit pages. It's a very quick one. Is that having worked in industry and government myself, I can kind of see the other side of the situation where, be it regulator or be it auditor or be it planner or whatever, they're kind of working within that stricture for a whole lot of reasons. There are legislative reasons, there are liability reasons, there are funding reasons. You're working on a budget that's been set, probably on a program that's been mandated, that then is codified. Your operations are codified, that falls out of legislation. So you kind of, it's a very difficult situation for the government and for the regulators too. But that said, it's an entangled world where industry people work with government people, and there's all kinds of perceptions. And in theory, but in actual practice, as we all know, it's not. It may not be as clear cut, and so this leads to a certain messiness in the situation. And so to be inclusive in that situation is a bit of a minefield as you try and bring all people in into a situation where they feel where they need to account for themselves, but where they also feel included and enabled to learn from what's going on.
Exactly.
Now, to get institutions to do that is difficult. One hopes that in a careful critique of forest practices, for example, and the unofficial word coming in through channels is, this has been really good for certainly at the federal level. They're saying, look, the audit on the Asticopsis was absolutely brilliant. It was so well done. So one is given faith and hope that will influence learning in those institutions to assist their processes to become better, whatever that means. So,
can I just ask?
Sorry.
Okay. Can I just? It's just a quick question, really. Where, if you engage in the participatory action research, and I've really enjoyed, your description of the cases, there is an issue around which a community can actually agree that they've got a concern. Okay? Now, here, and I'm really pleased William has come, because I mentioned William House to you, because William is trying to work in relation to Keynsham, it's very near Salford where you are, with a sense of community well-being, but we don't have, as far as I understand the project, a central issue that people can, if you like, unite around in terms of a participatory action research project. And yet I was feeling that your community-based auditing would have something really significant for us. And I'm just wondering whether you've had any experience where we have a community, but there isn't one particular concern. Now, am I making sense?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Now, I touched on that earlier, and I need to amplify it, I think. In any community, there are, if you dig, there will be many concerns. I promise you. Whether it's, and I don't know whether you've got what's it called back home. We've got the the citizens police. What do we call it? Where citizens come to debates and forums about security in the neighbourhood. Neighbourhood Watch.
Neighbourhood Watch. Yeah.
Have you got that here?
Yes.
Yeah. It can be something like that. There are many things. The one that I kind of pick on as an example was the persons who came up with a new idea about a farmers market for Scottsdale. Now, when we kind of advised on this and we kicked some ideas around without being, because it was his baby and we didn't want to be prescriptive and say, well, you need to go and buy this package because it's going to work as opposed to that one. We kind of took the tack, and we didn't survey on this, but we just asked the questions in a brainstorming way. Farmers markets, does that bring art in as well, street art perhaps? Does that bring in organics as well? Does that interface with tourism? So people in the group might have a tourist bent, and just sort of trying to put these strands out to, and then that could be, if a group coalesces and says, look, farmers markets, well, let's be systemic about it. This is the key to starting these things is to try to facilitate linkages or facilitate an enthusiasm that will lead to linkages. And so a group working around the issue might say, well, look, we'll have a letter campaign and we'll write letters to the editor and probably get a column in, for example. It might be television, but I'm just using newspaper because in our community lots of people read the local rag. And so here's a way of kind of getting ideas up, and then not long after you leave a phone number, the editor says, all right, I'll put a phone number in for you, and then the phone starts ringing, and then people with a common interest start to coalesce. Now, you don't know where that conversation's going to go, and that's what I love about it. I simply don't know. It's like strange art. I just put that canvas up there, and I just keep throwing paint until I stop. And if it's a masterpiece, it's a masterpiece. If it ain't, so what? It's that kind of problem. And you've kind of got to go with it. So it's this self-bootstrapping phenomenon. If there's a real issue, like the gas issue, now, mainland Australia, I must send you information, they have had huge problems. Subsidences, gas emissions, people, gas coming up through the blowhole, gas fires in the home, all this kind of crap, smelly landscape, fugitive gas emissions left, right and centre. My view was, just to jump on that as an issue, community just weren't engaged early enough. So you've got farmers climbing the wall because their farms are being taken over. You've got gas plants. It's a huge problem. So I need to send some information. I feel, personally, that if the conversation would have been initiated much earlier, then we wouldn't be in a situation now where I think, and I might be wrong here, I need to check my facts, but we're probably in like litigation or pre-litigation right now. And it's going to be, public money's just going to go down the Googler. It could be used for aged people, infirm people on the street, and here we are fighting over blooming gas fields. And so I think, and this is the difficult bit when you try to look for these weak signals of what a future could look like, and you talk to your community and you gather these weak signals of ideas that you can then begin conversations. It's a kind of you've got to kind of step back because it'll either be an avalanche or it'll be a dribble.
Thanks. Ray, I think.
Sorry.
Yes, I wanted to ask a question, but I just want to comment on this Keynsham thing because I'm interested in Keynsham. My daughter lives here, and I've been connected with the Cadbury craft.
Oh yeah.
Now that's an issue.
This is William.
Hello.
Yeah.
That's an issue. That's big, where you know the details.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. But the other comment on the local thing is, do you know the transition town movement?
No.
You do.
Yeah.
Well, the transition. Have you heard of the
I've heard
transition
transition towns.
Well, the transition towns has gone global now. It started in
Yes.
Totnes, this country, like Bob Hopkins. I live in a transition town, those, and issues just come up. People just start, and issues they just bubble up. Okay. Where I live, there's probably a dozen groups been formed, and they're not issues that have been in the press or local press or local radio. They have just come up because of conversations have started.
Exactly.
So anyway, that's
Thank you.
And there is the beginnings of a transition group in Keynsham.
Is there?
Transition in Keynsham, yes.
But I think there's 350 in this country now. It's quite
That's really
astonishing.
helpful, I think.
It's really
Yeah,
astonishing.
it's really helpful.
But the comment I wanted to make, or observation or question, is that there have been similar experiments to this, as you know. And I've been sort of dabbling in this for a few years, and one has been consensus conferences. Have you heard of those? and Denmark is the big
Yes.
user of those. And there's another thing called, there's not a generic name, but it's in Kent. It's called active mobs. Mobs for
Yeah,
mobilisation.
I heard of that, yes.
You've heard of that?
Yes.
Yeah. And I've been connected with funding that group. But here's the issue, right? You go through all of this, and there are similar processes, not identical, similar. And in the end, there's a local authority, there's a government, there's a quango, there's a deliverer.
That's right, yeah, yeah.
In the end, you can't get away from that.
That's right.
It's impossible. Okay. And my experience of these things is they'll start off, the deliverer, right, will start off
Enthused.
okay? And then it will go on and on and on. In the case that I attended a consensus conference in this country on GM foods, right? This is like 15 years ago. And it was sponsored by a major government quango, a $1 billion quango, okay? So it's a big issue, right? And there's a whole process for getting the communities involved and national selection. It's a huge thing. Costs millions, this thing. The quango committed to abide by the outcome of the community involved. They committed and reneged.
Yeah.
The quango, you said.
It's a quango. Yeah. It's gone now. I think it was called. It's something like the. I can't remember, National Food Standard Agency, something, I can't remember, okay? The same applies in much smaller scale things, right? A local authority, this is great, got this. In the end, you've got to get these buggers to deliver stuff.
Is this a difficult thing?
Right? And that's, now I just wonder what your experience of that is.
What we did is very, very early, is to, and this is going back, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, I think, we had a situation where the local council in a particular municipality was warming to some ideas, and then they were cold, and then they were a bit, either way on whether to support some ideas. And so discussions continued, and they appeared to be, if anything, sort of hostile towards the community involvement. But when we went back and looked at all the various vision statements and strategic plans, great on strategic, I don't know what they're like here, but great on strategic planning.
Lots of those.
We kind of reflected on that, and we said, okay, and over a period of a few years we kind of analysed that and talked, and we'd done surveys and so on. And we reached the point in the last few years where we said, okay, let's do something really innovative. Let's look back at all those strategic plans and let's get a list of them, a bibliography of them, and put some comments in. And we did, I think it's audit number, it's volume 6, number 3, I think, on the disc. And we actually, as part of the community forum that I showed you there earlier, we actually had this as a kind of a backdrop to this forum. It was actually one of the precipitating matters that led to the community get together, because when we look back, there was sort of a litany of these promises, these strategic plans and goals and strategies and stuff. And so we said, what does it all mean? How many have been actioned to the community group? And everyone sort of gives a blunt look, not really sure, we all talked. And so it's kind of this conversation went on. So we said, okay, what we'll do after drawing from the conversations we'd had as a group, we went back and we reflected on this with Dorset Water Watch, and I think it was Community Futures Network, and a group of us got together and said, look, okay, what we'll do then is we'll initiate a conversation with Council about all of these past plans, and we will form a memorandum of understanding with them in order to work cooperatively with the instruments and the goodwill we already have with the community to find out which ones are missing from the list, sort of thing, and reinvigorate them and continue on. Because people were getting quite and I'll do this time, don't I? Look at that. People were getting quite sort of pessimistic about it. People were very pessimistic. No one listens to us, and that was coming through strongly. So we went back and looked at these plans. So we thought, well, this will be an interesting test now, along the lines of what you're talking about. Where is the body of authority actually at? And you test that using a legal or quasi-legal sort of tool to test that. If you're really serious, then you would, because the memorandum of understanding was fairly open, you will say, yeah, look, sure, we need to sit down and talk. Yeah, this is important, because this is about vision and goals and the strategy to get there. wouldn't touch it with a barge pole. So straight away you know, don't you, where you're really at. It was an acid test, it was a litmus test to find out where we're really at. Now, we, as far as I'm concerned, no, in Tassie, that's the first time that had been done. A real life test. So we went back and rethought about that. And when the dams issue and I think the Astus Copsis came up, there was a change of council. In terms of certain members had been elected, and then there was a new mayor. And in the meantime, we'd had a meeting, our group had a meeting and reflected on it, and it became clear to people that the decisions were being made at the wrong level, because we said, well, who knocked it back? Oh, you know, was it a council decision? I didn't hear anything from the council. We were just told by the machinery, the administrators, that it was a no-go. Well, we need to see the minutes. They must have debated it, and it was all very unclear as to what was done. So sprung. And because the auditing documentation is so clear and meticulous, you had a clear pedigree of who said what, when and where you said. So we're able to go back and retrace our steps. Different from much of conventional activism, which is sort of almost a bit of a stab in the dark, you know, you make things happen. But here you've got a clear, and this hasn't, I don't think this has been written up as an audit, but we didn't want to push it too far because it indicated things were not good. So when we produced our, in concert with the Dorset Directions people, we had a morning tea and invited councillors, so we've used a bit of psychology. We didn't just head on with it and produce an audit and go to the minister and say, your council's out of control, which we could have, because, you know, it's not processing properly. That would be our argument. True or false, that would be our argument. We thought, well, let's use a bit of psychology. What we'll have here is a morning tea. We'll invite the new mayor and some councillors and the media, and we'll do a big poster, because every project, the community would have to do a poster, left to right, to explain what their issue is, what the possible impacts could be, and where to from here. It was kind of a bit of work they had to do. So I put this poster up, and the mayor came along. Well, he was enthused. It seemed he'd never heard of it, the whole idea of this engagement and so on. So we let the MOU slip. We didn't push that. We thought, well, that's just a something for our information. We're not going to hang that on him, because that's going to make it hard for the new mayor. So let's be intelligent about this and just appeal to the new mayor as a decision maker, as part of a decision making team, to cooperate with the Dorset Directions people and begin the conversation at that level.
Phil, sorry, is this you as facilitator or you as the community groups?
No, this is the distillation of everything that had happened to that point. But another community group had picked up the mantle for farmers markets and for a whole raft of ideas.
But in the decision not to...
No, we just stood back and said to the community group, you know, your baby, what do you want to do?
Right.
So at that stage, even at the morning tea, we weren't upfront. We just explained what had been done. That we looked at looked back at all the strategic plans and everything, and asked why. And so we had, you know, strategic plans and everything there, and the current reality of what was happening here. That was enough, because all the promises over here and what, you know, job losses and all the deliverables here. See, so we didn't need to say anything more. It was a prompt for conversation, not to bash them around the head with. So the mayor warmed to that, and so we then just backed off, and the new mayor and the persons that were raising these new ideas for farmers markets, they then got together, and then we just got on our horse and rode off. We just got on our horse and rode off. We didn't invade the space, because that's up to them. And that process apparently is still ongoing, because we'd had a lot of, at that stage, really bad impacts with the move out of plantation forestry. A big industry up the road had to go into a lot of other diverse areas, because it wasn't growing eucalyptus night seedlings anymore. I mean, huge. They were growing hundreds of thousands of seedlings a year, and that was just wiped. And he was the person, that guy, the owner of the business, was the person who initiated these new ideas. So we thought, great, that's all we can do here. And so TCRA, Tasmanian Community Resource Auditors, kind of backed out of that to let that conversation continue. Now, where that's gone now, I don't know. The conversation's ongoing. I mean, that's all you can do. Yeah. It's tough.
No, it must be what this detailed work you do, or your team does. I may have missed the explanation of this, and I'm sorry I was late.
That's okay.
It's quite expensive, isn't it?
No.
It takes somebody's time.
No, this is the thing. No, this is the thing. We're in recess now because we're considering bigger picture questions, but for 10 years it was done completely pro bono. right down to the auditing. I don't know what I've got here. Right down to publication. There's some 40 of those. You know, the community would have to pay our publisher, which was Desktop Publishing, for each of these. They're all ISSN. Our time as editors and supporting community and organising meetings and just playing a support role was completely pro bono. Now, there's upsides and downsides. You can say on the one hand, it's a very clean process. You're not subservient to a funding body. You know, the other important thing with this process, the TCRA process, the Tasmanian Community Resource Auditors process, as a group, as an incorporated body, a coalition of interest of fellow activist scientists who had sort of taken this sort of co-learning trajectory, is that most of the people on the committee, and there's 6 or 8 of us, were women. Which brings me to my next point. That is probably the most, in my humble view, is the most beneficial part of the process, is that they were women. There were 2 guys, me and another guy, and he was part-time, and I did the edit, worked on a lot of the editing and the organising, but the big stuff used to occur at evening dinner time meetings. And the women were so powerful in this process because they're not, this is my theory coming in now, I'm sorry, bear with me, sociologists and psychologists, they're not inherently spear throwers. They are receptive, they're more inclusive than males. And I learned something really important over 10 years. That the first thing, like when I spent my time in India, if you know Southern Indian culture, for a white Euro male, it can be bloody frustrating because it takes them forever to make a bloody decision and even longer to do anything. And so you end up being so frustrated, And I remember my first month-long visit, it was a fortnight into it, and I'm going, just about chewing the legs off chairs because stuff had to happen. But then I learned that time was not that important. If you were going to get to it and get to it properly, it was worth it. So straight away I learned part of the area of white man magic in a bloody hurry, I tell you. And in a hurry to fall down the hole. The Indians would sit, and I remember these glorious moments we'd be sitting, discussing, and then there'd be silence. And you'd be wanting to, but soon you learned that silence was really important because the silence was important as the words because you were reflecting and thinking. And then something else would be said, and then this flowing conversation, absolutely beautiful. In hindsight, the best 3 months I ever spent because I learned about the quietness of reflection and thinking and about the art of conversation. Whereas white guys, we talk at each other. We talk at each other. You get a bunch of women in a meeting, there's a lot of talk goes on, but it's it takes excursions all over the place. It's a really interesting phenomenon. And the ideas that we came up, I couldn't write them down as a structured argument. They just came up. They just like an electrical kind of it's inclusionality. It's just like an electrical thing just comes out, and there it is in all its glory. And then we work on it and develop it. But guys are too much in competition with each other. In the main, in my experience, I might be wrong here. I don't want to speak on behalf of people wrongly, but in my experience, there's a lot of guy competition goes on. Not all the time, but it can be very destructive. My experiences in the environment movement, man, was there some blood on the floor from time to time. But with women, you would get into these conversations and marvellous insights and innovations would spontaneously occur. Don't ask me how. But that's great.
Fernando, I think, did you have a...
I'm Fernando, I'm from Bolivia, and the things that you are sharing kind of resemble to some of the things that we do. I work with indigenous and peasant communities.
Yes.
And land is a big issue in my country. And the colleague was asking that at the end, after the communities realize what is the issue, then you come to the issue of delivery. And how do you assure that actually what it has been agreed is going to be implemented?
Okay.
And I think it's context dependent in the place where I come from. Institutions,
yes.
and government bodies, usually were in favor of those people that have more power.
The vested interests.
Vested interests. And in order to deal with that situation, which is historically also, because that's the way how things have been done, what communities, indigenous communities and peasant communities did is actually they implemented bodies of social control, yeah, that accompany the process, yeah, of land entitling for like 10 years, you know. And because land is actually a resource that's going to assure your livelihood, yeah, you have to invest your time and your energy, you know. And it was very interesting, the process of actually how these groups of social control have been following the government officers, for instance, responsible of land measuring and titling, and, you know, in order to actually do what they're supposed to do. You know? And that's one thing they want to say. And another thing that I found very interesting is, since when are you working with this approach? There has been a time when you have this kind of enlightenment, when because usually this comes to the issue of higher education, because we train, you know, professionals or academics in a certain way. We privilege, you know, the academic mindset or the technical mindset. From my own experience, it has been a very difficult process to open yourself to be inclusive of the other perspectives, you know, in this case of local knowledge or the, you know, or indigenous knowledge, you know, or folk knowledge, you know. And for us as academics or professionals, it is very difficult to open ourselves, you know, because it's to deny our professional subjectivity or self, you know, and open yourself to the legitimacy of the truth and the value of the knowledge. You know? And I would like, I don't know if you can share a story, if you have moments of enlightenment, because this is...
I can do that.
Could you just also share your book? Because it's
all in the book. Sorry about that. But it does tell that story, and it's a long story. But a couple of really important kind of moments in that trajectory I'll just share with you. And the first one was way back, when I say way back, I mean back in the 70s and 80s, and particularly when I became very active in the mid to late 80s. It was that crisis of, you know, what am I doing here? What does being effective mean? Is the question. So bringing myself to account. It was living theory, but I didn't know it. And the fear that my practice as a scientist activist was simply a mirror of the crisis that I was trying so hard to deal with. So I'd become the thing, and a lot of activists do, they become the very beast they're trying to slay, to use the metaphor. They become the dragon. Because that's the only way you can fight the dragon. Because dragons fight dragons, and you've got to be really smart. You know what I mean? It's just like when I was on the farm and you were herding bulls. The first thing you did was get off the horse to confront the bull, because the bull saw the horse as another bull. You were in mortal danger. So you get off the horse. It's counterintuitive, but you get off the horse. And so it's that kind of thing. It's that kind of process where I felt that if I kept going the way I was going, I would simply just be adding to the crisis. And so that left me with only one option, that was to research and to understand my own practice and my becoming. Now, that was reinforced. So that was kind of just an awareness. I didn't know what to do about it. It was cold sweat stuff. You wake up at 3 in the morning thinking, shit, you know, who am I representing? You know, and with what consequence? And you know, who have I othered today? You know, who have I acted on behalf of? You know, bad enough I'm buying, you know, Nestle's chocolate, which I shouldn't say, but, you know, I'm buying chocolate and putting somebody in poverty somewhere in the world. Bad enough I'm doing that, but what am I actually doing here? Whose dream am I living? Was the question I used to ask in my own simple mind. Now, where it really kind of bit for me was when I started working in industry. And I came in as an expert, as a chemist, to research problems with electroplating. And so, you know, you've got the power suit on, you come in, you're in charge, it's your patch, you've got your degree or whatever, and, you know, you're the colonel on the field, and they just respect you because of your station. And I soon learnt that I looked at the people working on the machines, and I remember having this thought, you know, And I don't know where the thought came from, and maybe I was conditioned by those other experiences, but I remember having the thought, listening to engineers and people talk, not disparagingly, but certainly not in encouraging terms about the abilities of the workers, you know. And I looked at them and I thought, well, I wonder what they do know. Because we had the horrendous problems with electroplating, you know, problems with getting substrate plate on, and we were plating engine bearings, and it was such a holocaust of problems. God, you know, like we were plating 100,000 bits a day, 100,000 individual half-shell bearings a day, and something goes wrong in tank 5 and you don't know until 14 tanks later, and, you know, garbage in, garbage out, you know, at $1 a pop, you know, $100,000 a day, can I do this, you know? And it really was quite terrifying for the individual, but terrifying for what you believe in terms of what a process should be doing. And so I remember having this thought about the workers, and all these problems were going on. So counterintuitively, I just went and asked the workers, how long you worked here? I told them. And we started, I'd go to their lunchroom and sit down and have lunch with them, you know, which is a real no-no. You know, it wasn't no-no, but it was sort of, wasn't frowned on, but it sort of wasn't encouraged, you know, you're talking to the workers. You know, what about the workers? So I went and sat with them and talked to them and learned all this stuff about what was wrong on the plating line. And I didn't have to read any books or, you know, phone anybody up or get a consultant in. And most of what was wrong was already in the heads of the people who were using the blooming machine. Pretty simple, really, a bit like inclusionality. You know, could it be so simple? And it was that simple. And so I learned very quickly the value of, it's a form of local knowledge. And so 10 years later, when I was reading Harding and post-normal science and all the theories about the importance of Indigenous and local knowledge, I understood exactly what they meant. And when I talked to my community people, I made the link and I could see that. Now, another experience in 1988 that changed my thinking was I was working with a farmer on I mentioned the tip site pollution issue where in their infinite wisdom, local council had thrown stuff in the ground. They were trench fill sites, and they fill with water and they overflow into a local stream, and he had deformed chickens. Chickens were born with missing heads, feet on back to front, no beaks. Seagulls were dying. Wildlife was dying where it drank in the stream. A whole lot of issues going on. You know, I'm polluted. Local vet says you've got chemical poisoning. Authority said, no, we've tested everything. Don't worry about it. Everything's all right. Now that guy graduated from school in grade 6, the farmer. He graduated from school in grade 6, he was a grade 6 graduate. And he was the smartest man you could imagine. Now, when I talked to him about, as an expert, I was playing expert role then, just started using community-based sampling in the very early stages, before the early 90s. And his savvy was impeccable. He was a farmer, he understood animals, and so his rule was if you understood animals, you had a fairly sporting chance you'd understand people. Because, you know, you're usually motivated by roughly the same things, you know. Fear, pain, food, shelter, that sort of stuff. And he said, most people are not very far away from that, believe it or not. And as a youngster coming to the problem of community engagement, I remember a couple of really interesting events that occurred in what was a 7-year case for me. I ended up writing the proofs of evidence for the barristers because he sued. It was the first time a joint suing had ever taken place in Tasmania. He sued the Department of the Environment, the local council and members of the Department of Prime Ministry. They were joined in a joint suing for the Supreme Court. And they ended up paying up. They actually paid him out. He actually won the case. And I remember, never forget this particular case, or chapter in the thing, and it's a huge chapter, and I haven't written extensively about it in the book, but we went to see the solicitor on this occasion. And we're sitting there talking to the solicitor, and we're talking about the proofs of evidence, and then it got to formulation of the actual writ. And what you do, you put up your proofs of evidence, and then once the proofs of evidence have been looked at by the barrister or barristers on your side, they said, right, we'll enter now the period of pleadings, and you go off to the other side and you exchange your proofs of evidence and you look at it to see how much firepower you got before you stand off and deliver. And that was okay. And then right about this time, the final writs were going to be produced, engrossed and submitted to the court. So we worked out what our firepower was. You know, I'm going to need a 10-pounder, you know, you're going to need a howitzer, you know, and you just work out how hard you're going to hit each other to win the war. That's what it's like. It's like an election. You exchange the writs and get into it. Claim wars and all. Anyway, here's this writ, ready to go. The steam's still coming off. It just come out of the heater. Royce says to him, better talk about this. And the solicitor says, well, yeah, okay, all right, we'll talk about it. Goes into the office. What's the problem? Sensing the issue. And I said, well, I don't think this is going to work. The solicitor said, like 2 years worth of work, what do you mean it's not going to work? You know, why tell me now? He said, well, if you've got a mob of sheep and you put them into a paddock and leave the gate open, what's going to happen? Well, the solicitor just about blew his stack. Sheep? What are you talking about? Mob of sheep, paddock? What the hell are you talking about? He said, well, if you put a mob of sheep into a paddock and don't close the gate, well, they'll get out. He said, well, that's exactly what's going to happen here. And the solicitor said, what the hell do you mean? He said, because you've got to sue them all, you've only sued one. The solicitor said, what do you mean? He said, we've only sued the council. You've got to sue the others. I said, because what'll happen is, he said, the council will blame those other two parties because they're government bodies and they'll get out of it, like that in court. Jeez, and the solicitor looked at me. He said, you want us to sue everybody? Because I couldn't help myself being young and a bit of an upstart. I said, look, if we've got to sue everybody in the universe, I said, you can back it in, that's exactly what's going to happen. He said, I'll have to think about it. All right, he said, we just went very high under the collar. We drove off. A week later, the phone rang. 2 other barristers came on the phone, heard the story. At the end of the conversation, the senior barrister said, I think he's onto something here, we'll have to join him. Now that's a grade 6 graduate. Now you tell me that ordinary people aren't smarter than the experts. Now that's no disparagement against us little barristers, because they're just doing their job. But it's buyer beware. Whether it's your car, whether it's your doctor, whether it's your dentist, whether it's your landlord, it's buyer beware. The citizen has got to be switched on. Now, I never forgot that. So local knowledge. He knew his situation with his farm, and he knew common sense.
Phil, I think,
Yeah.
no, this is really great, but we usually finish about 7
Sure.
o'clock.
No, that's okay.
Is that okay? In
Yeah,
terms
sure,
of-
sure.
If there's any more burning questions, but I mean, this has been such a delight, to have you here this evening. And I think everybody will have benefited enormously from your stories, but they are available, some of them, in
Sure.
The Unknown,
In The Unknown, yeah.
which is Phil's book. But it's just say, thank you very much indeed,
you.
Phil, for coming. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much.